The Nintendo Switch era has been a frustrating one for Pokémon fans. The evolutionary line from Sword and Shield to Pokémon Legends Arceus to Scarlet and Violet was one of slow but steady progress as Game Freak refined its ideas for how capturing, exploring, and battling should look in a fully 3D world. But this era has also played host to a major downhill slide in terms of overall polish, appearance, and performance across those three games. Pokémon Legends ZA, I'm happy to report, puts an end to that slide on basically all counts. It continues to successfully experiment with Pokémon's gameplay by translating its carefully cultivated turn-based battle system into an action-based one, and it does so while scaling back its ambitions for a massive world to a more manageable size, resulting in a tighter, more polished, and far more fun Pokémon than we've seen in several years. Pokémon Legends ZA takes place entirely within the bounds of Lumiose City, a Paris-inspired metropolis that I fondly remember from Pokémon X and Y. A sudden rash of wild Pokémon invading its city limits has resulted in conflicts between them and the people that live there, and necessitates wild zones within the city to keep them separate. It's into this tense environment that you show up via train, a young adult, for real, not a 10-year-old child, who is immediately adopted by a group that refers to itself as Team MZ. They are dedicated to protecting the city by day, and becoming strong enough to do so effectively by climbing the ranks of a local competition called the ZA Royale every night. The way ZA's characters and story are focused so tightly on Lumiose as a community unexpectedly reminded me of the Yakuza series in many ways. By not asking you to cross vast distances on a fairly abstract badge collecting journey, it's able to tell the stories of more characters in more detail, including through a lot of silly side quests. They often feature creative or weird scenarios that are resolved by your character, like Yakuza's hero, Kiryu, inexplicably being far and away the toughest person in the room. It took me 35 hours to roll credits while mostly staying on top of these side quests, but I still haven't managed to finish every single one in the post-game. As you grow, you'll encounter a cast of characters with different ideas about what Lumiose City needs to thrive, some of whom clash with one another. ZA wrestles with some actual real-world ideas as it questions what it means when multiple groups of people, or I guess creatures, inhabit the same space but have very different needs, and who should be prioritized when those needs conflict. ZA doesn't come away with easy answers, but it does provide some pretty interesting metaphors for real-world issues, both civic and environmental, and above all else, emphasizes compassion for others in trying to solve them. One sour note in all this is the lack of voice acting. I've played Pokemon games for so long without it that its absence didn't really bother me, except for during the major story cutscenes. Characters will dramatically move their mouths and flail their arms around while absolutely no sound comes out. It's jarring and immersion breaking, and I don't know what Game Freak was thinking here. Speaking of Game Freak needing to play catch-up, I am at least happy to say that ZA runs at a smooth and consistent 60 FPS on Nintendo Switch 2. NPCs and objects do still pop in rather suddenly, but it's substantially better than what we saw in Scarlet and Violet. I didn't see any character animations moving at agonizingly slow frame rates. I didn't personally run into any game-breaking bugs. None of my Pokemon got stuck in the floor or the wall. The loading screens are almost too fast to read the tips shown on them. Taken all together, I was able to play through the entire game barely thinking about performance, which is so much more than I could say for ZA's recent predecessors. As for the Nintendo Switch 1, it understandably doesn't perform as well on the weaker system. The frame rate targets 30 FPS, but doesn't always stay there. And everything from texture quality to pop-in distance just looks a little worse. It's nothing game-breaking, and still a major improvement over Scarlet and Violet that I would recommend if you don't have a Switch 2, but the many little performance problems do add up. So ZA runs fine-ish, but that doesn't mean it looks great. One major problem is that it takes place entirely in a plain, unattractive city. Most of the time, you will be looking at the same 5 or 6 building exteriors, all of which are flat, ugly images with no detail or depth. Just some windows and balconies painted onto a wall, Looney Tunes style. There's some variety in town, like a wild zone that gets covered in snow, a graveyard, and a sandy area. But for the most part, Lumiose is made up of a lot of the same parks, cafes, and paving stones again and again and again. But not all of ZA is aesthetically disagreeable. The building interiors you do get to see are detailed, colorful, cozy looking, and not repetitive. Character models are more expressive than before too, and there's a wider visual variety in NPC designs, thanks to small, long overdue touches like distinct facial features and differently colored outfits within trainer classes. Your own character's face customization capabilities continue to improve from past games as well. Outfit customization is pretty good, with lots of options to choose from, no gender-locked clothing, and the ability to mix and match colors of jackets, shirts, belts, and other items in certain cases for a wider variety of looks. And while I've dinged Lumiose for being visually uninteresting, that's not synonymous with it being uninteresting to explore. ZA mostly solves one of the biggest issues I had with both Arceus and Scarlet and Violet. They had these big, empty worlds devoid of real reasons to explore beyond the surface. ZA isn't like that. By shrinking the world down to a manageable size, Game Freak was able to fill it with thoughtfully placed rewards. Sometimes those are items, such as TMs or collectible, colorful screws that wait at the end of rather amusingly cumbersome platforming segments. But more often, those rewards are rare Pokemon. While most are confined to wild zones, some monsters do still lurk in the city's streets, and they're genuinely exciting to find. At first, you'll only see common Pokemon, but explore enough and you'll start to find alleyways, courtyards, and rooftops hiding rarer, more exciting monsters. It's moments like these that really flesh out Lumiose and make it such a delight to explore. ZA's most revelatory change is to the battle system. Pokemon is an action game now. It's genuinely impressive how well Game Freak managed to translate a familiar system of monsters, moves, status effects, items, and types into a completely different genre. Your Pokemon will follow you by default, giving you an indirect and interesting way to control their positioning somewhat and even dodge your opponent's moves. If you hold down ZL, they will instead square up with the opponent, and you can select and use moves. If you're in a battle against a wild Pokemon, you'll need to do all this while also moving your character out of danger, as they can damage and even knock you out. Adding an interesting new layer of strategy to how you position yourself, and thus your monster, for optimal offense and defense. The indirect movement system, while a little clunky to get used to, introduces an interesting strategic layer of positioning as you play with the flow of dodging and attacking. The moves themselves are delightfully complex in both their variety and the ways Game Freak has changed them to fit the action genre while keeping their spirit alive. Past Pokemon knowledge is still rewarded, even in this entirely new framing, with everything working roughly how you guess it might. While I hope Pokemon doesn't fully abandon turn-based battles, I would love it if the Legends spin-off series adopts this action system going forward and continues to refine it. And I cannot wait to watch the competitive community get its hooks into this and see what meta develops. Until then, we have the campaign's own challenges to overcome. Even casual players are likely to breeze through some of it. The ZA Royale, for instance, has you collecting points by defeating trainers until you get enough to instigate a promotion match and move up a rank. These battles are a joke. The battle zones you fight through to collect points try to shake things up by allowing you to sneak up on enemy trainers for an advantage attack, or be snuck up on yourself. But it's trivially easy to sneak up on opponents and knock out their first monster in a single blow, then thrash their second immediately after. It's not all a walk in the Poké Park. You'll still find challenge in other places, such as wild areas, where a powerful alpha Pokemon can summon a gang of smaller guys to overwhelm you if you're not careful. Most difficult and most fun are the story battles against rogue mega evolved Pokemon. These monsters are big and mean, deliberately going directly after your trainer a lot of the time and forcing you to carefully balance dodging attacks yourself and positioning your Pokemon well to slowly whittle down a big health bar. Some of the rogue Mega Evolutions have devastating second phase attacks, and Game Freak really goes out of its way to ensure all its new Mega Evolutions get their moment to shine through these encounters. Just wait until you see Mega Starmie. Pokemon Legends ZA finally feels like Game Freak hitting its stride in Pokemon's 3D era. Lumiose City may not be visually thrilling, but exciting Pokemon encounters, well-written characters, and amusing side quests still make it fun to explore, while also serving as the ideal vehicle for a more intimate and emotionally mature Pokemon story. ZA's total battle system overhaul, from turn-based to action, also works surprisingly well, managing to be intuitive for series veterans and engaging to play casually, while introducing all sorts of intriguing possibilities for deeper competitive play. And while ZA could use a little performance help on the Switch 1, it's a marked improvement from its predecessors, and significantly better if you're playing on Switch 2. After several years of putting the controller down with a deep sigh at the end of a Pokemon review, it sure is refreshing to once again be excited to keep playing for hours more.
Executive Reviews Editor Tom Marks here to talk with Reb Valentine about her review a little bit more and her Pokemon taste in general. This is wild to say, Reb, you've been our Pokemon reviewer now for like 5 years.
Yeah.
If you've read a Pokemon review on IGN in the last half decade, Reb probably wrote it. You reviewed Scarlet and Violet, both the DLCs for that, Pokemon Legends Arceus, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond, and Shining Pearl before that. You've also gone beyond that, obviously. You were our reviewer for Live Alive, Rune Factory 5, plenty of stuff. But let's talk about this, because this is the first time we've had you on since we've started doing these reviewer interviews to let's talk about your Pokemon taste. What's your history with the series?
I've been playing Pokemon pretty much as long as I've been playing video games at all. The very first system I ever owned was a Game Boy Color. It was given to me for Christmas, along with a copy of Pokemon Gold and Pokemon Silver, because those were the brand new hot Pokemon games at the time. I got those. I think I beat Pokemon Silver in like 3 days. I just became so obsessed with it. And then I played Gold, which is basically the same game, but with slightly different Pokemon. But then I played that one all the way through, and I wanted more. And obviously those are the second generation of Pokemon games. So I begged my parents. My birthday was not too long after Christmas. I begged them for Red, Blue, and Yellow. And through various family members and gifts over the next year or so, I ended up getting all 3 and played through all 3. And ever since then, I have played at least one game from every single generation of Pokemon, if not both. Even during the times where I wasn't as in love with Pokemon, I was still playing Pokemon every time it came out, because it was just sort of a staple of my gaming taste.
Yeah, I love that. I think a lot of people, it's an annual or semi-annual thing that feels like sort of coming home to in a certain way with that nostalgia.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna do the really terrible mean thing and make you pick your favorite child. Do you have a favorite generation, a favorite game in the series, even if that might be a spin-off, what have you, or a go-to at least?
It's really tough, because I like the instinctive easy answer for me is generation 2, and specifically Pokemon Crystal, because that's the generation that I started with. Crystal was a slight improvement on Silver and Gold, and this is gonna, I don't know, maybe this doesn't sound silly, but I played Gold and Silver and I loved them, but then Crystal came, and I would take them onto the playground, all the time and play with people, but I was always the only girl playing Pokemon with all the boys at the time. It was just sort of, I think, a more gendered thing at the time. Obviously, plenty of girls played Pokemon, but just at my school, it was not like that. And then Crystal came out. For the first time, you could play as a girl, this cool chick named Chris with blue pigtails, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the entire world. And so I got really, really into Crystal, and I think just being able to play as a character who I identified a little more with really gave that game a special place in my heart.
So one of the things you talk about in the review is this, the new combat and how kind of revolutionary that is within this and how much you like it. But you also say, you don't necessarily want every mainline game to be turn-based, I think is a very fair sentiment of like, I enjoy this, but that's not necessarily exactly what mainline Pokemon is. So my question for you is, of ZA, what do you want to see actually make it into the mainline games? How much of this formula do you want to see just as sort of the norm going forward if real-time combat is not necessarily one part of that?
I think formulaically, I actually would prefer that they kept somewhat separate. I think it's really cool that we have a mainline series of games that are, they've adopted some of the action mechanics, obviously, for catching Pokemon, which I think is great. Please keep that. But it has this turn-based battle format, and so much of the strategy and history and mechanics of Pokemon has been built on that over multiple decades now. It would be a shame to just throw that out the window, and I think some people really would prefer that format. And so I think keeping that as a part of the mainline games and then letting the Legend series be a little more experimental, a little weirder, is a really great way to sort of delineate those two things so that we can have our cake and eat it too.
You talk about how it was on this downward slide, and then now this is them finally getting some momentum going in the right direction. What do you think is the top of your priority list to keep that momentum going?
The big complaint that, I talked about and other people have talked about is the fact that Lumiose City just looks kind of flat and boring. I would love it if Game Freak could figure out whatever it is they need within their souls to make a game that is this sort of big open world Pokemon adventure, but also looks like a game made in 2025, 2026 or whatever. We've got Breath of the Wild, we've got Monster Hunter, we've got Xenoblade, we've got these big open worlds that don't just look like these kind of flat, repetitive textures over and over and over and over again for miles. And they shrunk down to this city environment, and they still didn't quite manage to have a whole lot of visual variety. And I don't know what it's gonna take, but I do think there's room to sort of up their game and make something that is pretty and functional and not just sort of bare bones functional. The actual gameplay is great. They really, I mean, just keep doing that, right? Pokemon are fun to collect. Their monster design's amazing. Battling them is great. They changed it to an entirely new genre and it's still great. I don't know. Keep making cool monsters, I guess.
Yeah, it's very interesting to have seen the struggle of the jump from 2D to 3D.
Yeah.
There's a lot, when something is low detail in 3D, it's a lot more noticeable than when it's in 2D.
Yeah, I think it's especially noticeable for Game Freak as well, because in 2D, this is with a couple of exceptions, but especially the older games, Game Freak was praised for their sprite work in a lot of cases. The Pokemon sprites were always really interesting pieces of art. That was so much, that added so much to the character of the Pokemon, even when you were seeing them in a still image, and even when it was just pixelated, and it left so much to your imagination. And even in those top-down 2D games of yore, you would wander down a forest path and there would be, something interesting there. I remember walking on a tiny strip of land in the very back of a cave in Ruby and Sapphire just to catch a Bagon, because it was the only place you could find one. And that added so much to the lore and the mystery of these games and these creatures. And I feel like some of that has been lost in the translation to 3D, and I want them to get it back again, man.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything small, funny, that didn't quite make it into the review that you would shout out, or something that tickled you?
Oh, let's see. I didn't mention this, but I'm not someone who's a shiny hunter or anything, but I do think shiny Pokemon catching is they've solved that problem. There's been various sort of criticisms and back and forth over, they had this cool little noise that would play when a shiny Pokemon popped up in Legends Arceus, and that really helped people, but then they got rid of it in Scarlet and Violet, and people were upset because they would just lose track of shiny Pokemon, or they would never see them. They didn't know they were on the map. And I've caught 3 shiny Pokemon just playing through my campaign, not really hunting them. I had a Sandile on my team that I evolved into a Crocorock, and he's a weird color, and I love him. It's fun. It sort of adds again to that excitement and that wonder of oh, there's a gold Magikarp in that river. What's that doing there? I gotta get over there. That's really cool. And so I was happy that they re-added the sound back, and they made them sparkle a lot more, and they did a lot more to make that aspect of the game interesting.
Reb, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us a little bit more about your tastes and the game and your review and all that jazz. If you want another sort of cutesy game of a different genre, we did a review of Keeper recently, and if you want a different monster catching game, I guess is the segue here. Digimon Story Time Strangers from earlier this month as well. And for everything else, keep it right here on IGN.